Thank you, everyone. Thank you. And now, Toby Reisner from One Family Fund. Thank you so much.
Hi there, I'm Toby Rosner, and I'm the Canadian Executive Director of One Family Fund here in Canada, the Canadian arm of the very special organization that was just shown in this video. As you may have guessed, except for the opening credit, we made that video before October 7th. On October 6th, the Jewish people had just celebrated the New Year and bid goodbye to a year that saw 49 innocent Israeli lives brutally lost to Islamic terror, many of them kids, including 3 sets of young siblings murdered in cold blood. Thousands of others were wounded. In a New Year e-blast to our One Family community, we had just referred to 5783 as the worst year for terror in Israel since 2008. On October 6th, as I was packing my suitcase to fly to Israel the next day, One Family was still a little fringe charity here in Canada with a relatively small donor community, small but mighty, with sort of a cult-like following. Most Canadians who supported us knew of us one of 2 ways, both of which you saw a little about in the video. Our donors were either people who had come on our annual hike to Israel over its 15-year span, or supported One Family Canada's Camp Timberlane program, which we're now preparing for, coming up to its 17th summer, bringing joy to bereaved kids. On October 7th, One Family tragically became a charity of choice here in Canada, as our family of bereaved Israelis suddenly grew by literally thousands in one fell swoop. That family continues to grow exponentially every day as we hold our collective breaths and wake up to news from Gaza every morning about our brave soldiers and learn about the latest terror attack in Israel, something still happening routinely, but something that's often lost in the bigger war news of the day right now. One Family's work today continues as it has for 23 years. There's no way for One Family to get to every bereaved individual right now under the circumstances. The organization continues to scale up as quickly as possible, with many thanks owed to many of you in this audience who've helped One Family help more people through your support of our work on the ground since October 7th. Today, in news that was released by the Jerusalem Post around 2 o'clock, the Genesis Prize Foundation, dubbed the Jewish Nobel Prize by Time magazine, announced its 2024 awards. The awards went to Israeli organizations providing treatment, counseling, and support to the released and rescued hostages and their families. I'm so proud to say that One Family was named today as one of the recipients of this great honor. To close, when the world's cameras turn off and the focus on Israel fades into the background, as it eventually will, One Family will still be on the ground in Israel, doing what we've been doing for more than 2 decades already, for the thousands upon thousands of devastated Israelis whose lives will never be the same. When you find yourself wondering how you can help Israel in these gut-wrenching times, as we all do, and when you're trying to make sense of the overwhelming number of worthy charities that are coming at you, please know that if you consider One Family, whether by donating $18 or $1,800 or any amount you like, you will make the difference of a life of a bereaved and broken Israeli. Where it seems like there's no hope, you've just seen in the video that against all odds, given the right support, these people will live again. Not only will they live, but they themselves will become beacons of light that will help the newly bereaved know that there's hope for them too. Amir, wherever you are, Amir from Tafsik, thank you from the bottom of our hearts for including One Family in your program today. It's an honor and a privilege to be here at Tafsik's inaugural event and to welcome your already remarkable organization to the battered Canadian Jewish landscape. Douglas Murray, thank you for your voice on all matters, but in particular today in support of Israel, in support of truth. You give hope to so many of us on dark days. Hope that Contrary to what it may feel like to most of us these days, not the entire world has lost its marbles. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I would like to welcome Amir Epstein, the better half of Tafsik.
Oh, it has been a long week, but we did it. No crazy protesters outside. We avoided the hate mobs. We got 1,300 of some of the best people. Thank you for coming, guys. My name is Amir Epstein. Along with Brian Lipovetsky, we founded Tafsik organization. Today we launch a very important mission called TICA, which stands for the Emergency Coalition Against Hate. For the Jewish community, we suffered the worst egregious atrocities of our people have faced since the Holocaust. What we witnessed on October 7th wasn't just pure violence and hatred. We saw the darkest perversion of humanity. The ecstasy in their eyes from the barbarism they committed is a darkness too repulsive and revolting to mimic, even for horror films. Today, our community faces complicity to the violence we suffered and excuses for why it happened. They call it resistance. Resisting Israel by raping women. Resisting Israel by putting babies into ovens. They are all insufferable cowards. In Canada, we are populated by Islamist pro-Palestinian mobs who share in the same ideologies as Hamas, or at the very least excuse their sick, perverted actions. I want to make it very clear, Islamist does not mean Muslim, as there are many Muslims here today, our allies, fighting against the same fight as our enemy, all over here. We see the Islamists attacking decent, hardworking Canadians, and it's not because they care for the Palestinians. They do not. They want one thing, an Islamic caliphate where everybody in this room must submit to their ideology and bow down to Sharia law. This isn't my theory. It's not a scare tactic. This is what they're telling us, loud and clear. I believe them. There are larger numbers and growing under our current administration. They have brainwashed the far left and has now become fashionable to support terrorists. The masses believe they share a common goal, simply to decapitate democracy. These useful idiots are far left Marxist, communist, woke haters of Western ideologies and democracy. our freedoms discarded at the expense of their lazy fantasies. They march with rainbow flags on their shirts while standing with those who want them all dead. Imagine that. It would be akin to African Americans marching the streets of Washington, D.C. with their KKK hoodies over their heads. Ironically, though, the KKK and the pro-Palestinians do have a lot in common, as they like to share the same cowardice habits of covering their faces while, of course, shouting racist slurs in public. We've seen groups like Queers for Palestine, Chickens for KFC, Jewish Voices for Peace, both self-loathing, fanatical groups of people who support those who would throw them off of rooftops in their home Islamic countries, and will do the same here if given the chance. These Islamist and far-left groups together are dead set on ending all democracies. So every single time you hear them say free, free Palestine, remember what they're actually saying is kill, kill Canada. Kill, kill America. Kill, kill Australia. Kill, kill Germany. Kill, kill Israel. And kill, kill democracy. Yet, our Western universities encourage the brainwashing of our youth into believing that socialism and communism and Marxism will bring them freedom. My father, sitting right here, he came from a communist country. He'll tell you it's not as wonderful as they think it is. The money given to universities to push their anti-democratic agenda comes from Islamic countries whose Trojan horse was welcomed with open arms. The hate they propagate against Israel is a projection of hatred against all of the West, including Canada. They don't actually care for the Palestinian people, or they would have marched for the tens of thousands of Palestinians killed in Jordan during Black September. They don't care about the Palestinian people, or they would have marched against Lebanon, forcing a refugee status on 500,000 Palestinians for the last 75 years. And they don't care about Palestinian people, or they would have marched for the hundreds of thousands who fled Syria and the tens of thousands who were murdered by the Assad regime. They hate Israel not because they care for the Palestinians, but because they hate the Jews and they hate the West. The Iranian people know better than most what Islamic extremism really means. And today, Canadian Iranians are attacked and murdered by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps living amongst us here in Canada. The IRGC has its long tentacles penetrating our country, within our universities, within our government. How did this even happen? Their only purpose is to instill fear. The IRGC hope to topple our democracy and replace it with their terrorist, bloodthirsty, oppressive ways. Our Hindu brothers and sisters in Canada are attacked by the same ideological terrorists who committed the single worst terror attack in Canadian history after blowing up an Air India flight, killing 329 Canadian and Indian civilians. Our Christian community, constantly disparaged, constantly belittled by the far left just the same. The Azerbaijani, the Albanian communities, the Kosovars, we're all fighting the same fight here. We just want to live in peace, love our families, enjoy our freedom, and be left alone. The violent attack by Hamas is not a war against Israel. It's a war against everybody in this room. It isn't just a hatred for the Jews, it is hatred for everybody in this room. It is a full-scale assault on Western ideologies, and we see their ugliness emerge by the millions when they march in Australia, Britain, France, Germany, America, and of course right here in Canada. Our organization, Tafsik, was born from the ashes of the October 7th massacre. We felt an electric shock that reverberated down our spine and has awoken all of us here in this room. Gone are the days of the scared, frightened, let's not bother anybody Jew, and born are the fight back Maccabi warrior Jews. Each of our different ethnic communities here today may be few in numbers, but together we are bigger than them. And that is why we must speak as one voice, defending our democratic morals and our Western ideologies together. The only way our children will have a future in Canada is if we stand together. Today and every day moving forward, I am Jewish, I am Iranian, I am Hindu, I am Christian, I am Azerbaijani, I am Albanian, I'm all of you. Today is the launch of TICA, the Emergency Coalition Against Hate. And together, our communities will lobby the government and demand to be heard. Canada's future depends on our fighting together, and it starts today. Right now, I'd like to take a moment to make special mention of a few members of the audience who have been fighting alongside the Jewish community side by side for quite some time. They are Iranian nationalists and former political prisoners of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And they have had firsthand experience as to what can happen to a society taken over by territorial and religious conquest. The Iranian Guard did exactly that 45 years ago this month. The individuals I'd like to bring up to the stage fought back courageously, and they were thrown into prison, tortured, and kept in solitary confinement for standing up against the evil terror regime. In Canada, they stand against violent pro-Palestinian protesters and have suffered dislocated shoulders, broken bones here in Canada, waving a Canadian flag at a pro-Palestinian rally. That was their crime. Please welcome to the stage our brave allies, Saman Sima, Siyavish Sasavi, Tima Tajdini, Atash Yokdemi, Foro Khan, Moshe Sadijanor. I'd like to also invite the following leaders of the Hindu community to come up. The Coalition of Hindus of North America, Anuja Jani, Rishabh Saraswat, Rushi Wali, Ravi Huda, and Singad Manikar. Come on. India. Please also welcome the National Director of International Christian Embassy of Jerusalem, Donna Holbrook. Donna Holbrook. From the Azerbaijan community, directors of the network of Azerbaijani Canadian Friends, Anar Jahangirli, Dmitry Kirillov, Arzu Boskar, and Nikki Jabieva. The president of the Canadian Albanian Network, Nasser Berisha, activist Visni Konchuvka, Lira Koji, and W. Arifi, the consul of Kosovo, Sedat Berniku. And let us stand together and raise our flags. This is TICA! I'd like to invite Scarlett to the stage. Come over here, please. If everybody can remain standing, we're going to sing the national anthem. She's got a beautiful voice. This is a great moment to pay tribute right here. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, please sing with me. Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all thy sons' command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God, keep our land glorious and free. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Thank you.
Amazing. Give it up to Scarlett. In this time of faltering journalism, we are honored to have here today a British journalist who continues to seek the truth in a world of falsehoods. In the words of Douglas Murray himself, when 99 lies are being told and one truth, the truth will eventually win. Don't underestimate the validity of truth in an era of lies. Here to discuss the dangers of hate, radicalism on democracy in Canada and around the world, please welcome the remarkable Douglas Murray. Thank you. Come, have a seat. Yeah. So, how was your flight?
First, thank you very much for that very warm reception on a very cold night. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. My first question is kind of an easy one. I figure start slow. I want to ask you, when you were 7 years old, did you ever think you would grow up to be a hero to the Jewish people around the world?
That's very flattering. No, I suspect not. But I would have been pleased to hear it, I'm sure. But no, I'm deeply moved by the reception here tonight and in Jewish communities and others around the world. It means a great deal to me. Although I find it a slightly mixed blessing in a way. In one way, I'm enormously moved by responses I get from Jewish friends around the world, and specifically from Israel, where I've been since October. But on the other hand, it slightly saddens me, because it suggests that Jews around the world feel that they don't have many friends. I don't think that is the case, by the way. I think you have many friends. But I do urge those people to speak up. Silent majorities aren't much good. Vocal ones, that's something.
Justin Trudeau's immigration minister. Wow, okay. Justin Trudeau's minister, Mark Miller, announced Canada will be inviting 1,000 Gazans into our country. He advanced the yearly designated amount of UNWRA before pausing funds, of course, for the whole year. Canada voted in favor of a UN resolution for a ceasefire. Trudeau refuses to designate the IRGC a terrorist organization. Trudeau alleged support and protection of anti-India Khalistanis responsible for Canada's worst terror attack ever. Melanie Joly, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, is blocking military contracts to Israel. And just this week, they introduced an online hate bill that will work to convict people who hurt or offend people online. This is all just in the last 6 months. What would you say to Justin Trudeau if he was sitting right here?
Well, The first thing I'd say is that he should do something that he doesn't do enough, which is listen. I've been, as I just mentioned, I've been in Israel over recent months. I've been there many times over the years, covered most conflicts since and including the 2006 Hezbollah-Lebanon war. But one thing that really struck me recently was a piece by a friend of mine, the historian Neil Ferguson, just this week wrote in Bloomberg. He suddenly brought this to mind. It's a moment of clarity. The year before this, I was in Ukraine with Ukrainian forces when they were fighting to push back the Russian advance, and I was with them when they retook Kherson. And you know, nobody said that the Ukrainians should stop. Nobody has said that the Ukrainians shouldn't win. What is the problem with governments like this in this country? That they simultaneously say, and I deeply wish the Ukrainians success in their fight against Putin, but how can it be that people like Justin Trudeau base their moral sense on the bravery of standing alongside the Ukrainians? They say the Ukrainians must fight to the end, we must help them, we must arm them all the way. And sometimes they feel very manly for doing that. But you know, why is it that Israel always has to be made to fight to a draw? Why is it Israel that every time she's involved in a conflict is told, you've got a little bit of time, but we're not going to back you to victory? Oh no, you get the chance to have a little bit of victory and then we'll make sure you don't win. That's not being an ally, that's being a coward, and a duplicitous coward at that. I'm amazed by that double standard. And as I say, it was only Neil's piece this week that really brought it home. But there are so many things one might say to Justin Trudeau and others. I mean, one obvious one is, and by the way, his counterparts in other parts of the West have done similar things. The First Minister of Scotland has called for the people of Gaza to be moved to Scotland, which is... it would be a great shock to many of my relatives in Scotland, and I'm not sure how the Gazans would put up with the weather. But anyway, you know, I would say to people like Justin Trudeau about that, just wonder one thing, if you can wonder still. Wonder why the most severe wall blockade in the whole world is the wall between Gaza and Egypt. Ask why. One of my bêtes noires is Queen Rania of Jordan, partly because I was once unfortunate enough to be at an event with her, where, I'll never forget it, the head of Google, Eric Schmidt, was interviewing her much like this, and he was saying things like, "Your Royalness, Your Highness, Your Majestiness, Your Sereneness, tell us, you know, we're in the era of Brexit and Trump, tell us what we need to learn, you know, in our democracies." And I was just sitting at the back going, she's only got one piece of advice: marry a king. That's it. That is the totality of her insight. But she has been all over the airwaves in recent months doing this. She does furious interviews. Christian Anandpur and others, they also say, "Your Highness, Your Sereneness, educate us about this." Nobody says to her, "Tell us what your father-in-law did to the Palestinians. Tell us about that." Tell us about Black September. Let's have the whole thing out. Why is it that uniquely, it seems, among all refugee situations in the world, and there are many, that the people of Gaza are not expected to disperse across neighboring countries? It's because the neighboring countries know something that Justin Trudeau does not. I'm afraid to say there is nothing intrinsically wrong with the Palestinian people, but you know, Hamas has had exactly 18 years of governing the Gaza. They were given a state. They were given a state. They have had 18 years. 18 years, as you know, is the education of a child. And psychopaths, as we all know, are almost certainly born. But sociopaths are made. And Hamas has tried to make a sociopathic society where the greatest thing a child can wish for is to kill Jews. Now, no country on earth would want to take a population that would need permanent de-radicalization. Nobody in the region. And if Justin Trudeau wants to do it, that's a matter for you voters.
We've seen the most unlikely of groups come together. We've seen the far left, Marxist, communist, socialist, woke, shit for brains, I don't know, whatever you want to call them, team up with the far, the Islamist, extremists. Who do you think is the bigger threat to Western society? The growth, like a cancerous tumor of the left, the far left, I should say, please, or the Islamists coming here with a passion to enforce the caliphate?
Well, I think they now come hand in hand. I'd say there's a third group, if I may. The first, you're quite right to identify, there are radical Islamists who just do such a disservice to their faith and to Muslims around the world. And they have noticed something, which is that societies like ours are weak. We're very weak. We're pushed around all the time. The question of reciprocity is almost never brought up. But what does a tolerant, liberal, in the true sense, society like Canada or Britain or America do if it has people within it who would wish to stop it? That's a very big question we're going to have to answer in the coming years. The second, the group of far leftists and others, well, they're a case for a psychiatrist, really. Obviously, they include the absolute madmen, some mad them, I suppose one should say. I don't wish to misgender the criminally insane. Somebody mentioned Queers for Palestine. I say, and I can only say this in an informed audience like this, who'll get the joke, but I say that they are the gay Naturi Carter. Every group, every community has some absolute nutters, and if Queers for Palestine never went to Palestine, they'd have to move to Israel. Although, to make a slightly off-color joke I've got to be careful about, I did say recently in an interview in Israel that I said to an interviewer, I was trying to get a moment of levity in a not very light-hearted moment. I said, did you know there's a truce? Hamas have invited Queers for Palestine to come to Gaza, and they've said it's safe for them, and It is because there's no more tall buildings to throw them off. But I wanted to focus more on a third group, which is much, much more concerning. And the third group is the group that is the woefully uninformed. There's no reason why a Canadian student getting their parents into debt to go to university should come out malevolent and thick. But weirdly enough, in all of our countries, this happens. How has it happened? It's happened, in my view, because there has been a system of intense indoctrination from a form of thought, if you can call it that fell out of the American Academy. And it is a perception of the world which has almost nothing to do with the world. But the perception of the world is everything in life can be seen through this prism. It's oppressor and oppressed, colonialist and colonized, victim, perpetrator. And this very inadequate analysis of the world is transplanted onto the Middle East. And they think it works there. You know, this doesn't work anywhere, this ideology. The people who follow this ideology have not yet solved the problems of one council area anywhere in the world. So if I was them, would be humble about trying to transplant it everywhere. But this perception is the one these people are running off. And obviously, it is just laden with bad thought, contradictions. I mean, let me just give a couple. Weren't these same people the ones that told us over recent years, believe all women? Weren't they the same ones? Weren't these the people who said, believe all women right up to the point that Jewish women were being raped on camera? And they had nothing to say. Nothing. When they say, oppressor oppressed, who do they think was being oppressed on the 7th of October? Who do they think? When they give their full-throated support to genocidal chants like from the river to the sea, and again, as we all know, they couldn't point to the river and they don't know the sea. But when they do this, thinking they're doing something good, those young people have to be educated, to use one of their favorite terms. Let me educate you. Always said by the person who knows least, but to educate them for a moment, I would always say that if these people, and we see them all over the Western campuses, I don't say this at all lightly, but I would pity them if they ever got their way. Because these people think that they have oriented their sense of social justice towards being anti-fascist and anti-Nazi. And, you know, I wonder how they would think if they got their way and realized that they'd finished the work of Adolf Hitler. I, for themselves, hope they never get their own way. And I hope they can be educated out of the evil that they have been educated into.
A few years back, the United Nations appointed the Islamic Republic of Iran as the Commission on the State of Women. In quotes, Iran, a terrorist regime that beats, blinds, arrests, tortures, rapes, and kills female protesters, as quoted by Hillel Noor, director of UN Watch.
you very much.
Is it time for all democracies and moral countries to cut ties with the United Nations and start anew? Or do you think they are salvageable?
There have been lots of attempts over the years to do something about the United Nations, and there were obviously moves in the 70s, there were moves in the 2000s to form something like a union of democracies or something like this. And the problems of the United Nations remain what they've been all of our lives. The problem is that it's a forum where the world's totalitarianisms get the pretense that they're the same as the world's democracies. As you say, I mean, the Human Rights Council is one of the worst offenders, and yes, of course, you end up in these just la-la land, no, Alice in Wonderland situations where, as you say, the Iranian revolutionary government chairs something on the status of women, and the North Korean government chairs the one on press freedom or whatever. And I mean, I enormously admire Hillel Neuer as a friend, but I've often said I just don't know how you do it, because just being through the looking glass for so long in Geneva, it does something to people. But the problems of the UN remain the same, and the problem is always that what you would set up would be a UN-like organization. The one thing I would say can be done is that people can be educated about what the UN is not, you know. Okay, you have these votes, you have the endless resolutions against Israel and so on. Sure, okay. Just know that the game is rigged. You know, the famous joke is that the UN should have a soccer team. And the response is, yeah, but who would they play? Well, it's Israel, of course. You know, it's been rigged like this for decades. In 1975, when the Zionism is Racism resolution was passed at the United Nations, and Daniel Patrick Moynihan, a great distinguished Democrat, gave that extraordinary speech of rebuttal. The motion was, among other things, put down by Idi Amin. Okay, Idi Amin apparently had the right to decide what racism was. A man who had the blood of more Ugandans on his hand than anyone else in recent memory. I once had a copy editor in an early book of mine say, when I mentioned Idi Amin, I think you've made a mistake here. You say that you describe Idi Amin as a wife eater. Surely there's a B missing. I said, oh no. Sadly not. But, you know, and when that resolution passed, the Zionism is Racism resolution, I mean, imagine what Idi Amin did to his country and his people. But the reception that night to celebrate the resolution passing was hosted by Kurt Waldheim of the SS. So my view is that since then, no one should take lessons in morality from the United Nations. But again, it's a question of particularly young people understanding that the UN is not what it pretends and claims to be. So when people say, you know, the United Nations has ruled on this, I think you have to understand its edict should not be regarded as universal or indeed moral.
Why are they hyper-focused on Israel? What is the obsession? More resolutions against Israel than every country on earth put together, including North Korea, Fighters of Freedom in Venezuela, Russia, China. How does this even happen?
Well, it's several reasons. I mean, one is that the Organization of Islamic Conference is very important in the United Nations. It has dozens of countries at its beck and call, whereas Israel is the one Jewish state. again, you've all seen the videos of people doing vox pops at campuses and so on, and asking students how many Jewish states are there, 1, 12, or 89, and they go, But I think it's like 26. A number you weren't even offered. Anyway, but of course, I mean, in simple numbers terms, Israel is vastly outnumbered at the United Nations. And you have the non-aligned countries. You have countries like South Africa that are easily bored. I mean, why did the South African government decide to do this? They didn't. The South African government can't keep the lights on in Johannesburg, okay? They have serious problems. Serious problems. Does anyone really think they were suddenly spurred to moral outrage about the Gazans? Of course not. The regime in Tehran paid them, recruited them, and got them to do the job. And so they acted as a proxy, one of the many proxies of Tehran. And I think that for that reason and many others, Israel will be at a disadvantage. One other thing that has to be said is, there's always there's a disconnect which the United Nations epitomizes, which is the disconnect between people you can speak to and who might listen, and people who will never listen. Some of you have probably had this experience in your lives, you can end up complaining most to the people nearest to you. You can end up treating harshest the people who are closest to you. Sometimes you're nice to strangers and not to the people around you. And in my view, the world's democracies have realized, Israel does listen. It does care. It does not want to be accused of a horrific crime like genocide. The North Korean government does not care and will not listen. And that creates a total difference in the way, it's the same with Israel and Hamas. You'd think from some people, including some Israelis, that the 130 remaining hostages are held in Benjamin Netanyahu's basement. I mean, I'm serious. It's all about the pressure to put on Netanyahu, the pressure to put on the Israelis. Why don't you put the pressure on Hamas? Because Hamas doesn't listen. And, I'll tell you a story off the record because we're in private. I have a friend who always says, I'm not indiscreet, it's the people I speak to. But I'll tell you a story off record. In November, I was at a meeting in the Knesset with the families of all of the children hostages, and some representatives from the government, and also some representatives from UNICEF. Now, UNICEF, as one of the parents pointed out, has one job, just to look after kids. And UNICEF was silent on the abduction of Jewish children. Silent. And when the head of UNICEF was meant to finally come to Jerusalem, she called in sick. And I discovered during the meeting, although I didn't say it to the parents, that she was actually in Gaza. And the deputy head who she sent sat there in front of these unimaginable, in front of these parents, and took notes occasionally and expressed sorrow. And they'd done nothing. And one of the reasons why they'd done nothing was because they presumably knew Hamas doesn't give a damn about UNICEF. The Israeli government does. The governments of most developed democracies do. You think you're going to persuade Hamas to do anything they don't want to do unless you force them? This is one of the problems we've all got into in the democracies. We've got into this mad situation where we berate our friends, and those who would want to kill us, we somehow keep out of the equation.
You've mentioned seeing and meeting with these bereaved families and whose children are still underground. Can you share with everyone what you saw in terms of, I know you've probably seen the video of the massacres by Hamas themselves, who admit and cheer, as you said, gleefully. What would you say to those who deny, and there's so many of them, that just say it didn't happen? October 7th didn't happen.
Well, one of the reasons I went, I was in New York on the 7th, and on the 8th went down to Times Square because there was an anti-Israel protest already, with gleeful people waving placards celebrating the massacre as the fighting was still going on in the south. And I happened to be doing a tour at the time, or starting a tour with Jordan Peterson around a number of European countries. And but I got to Israel as soon as I could. And yeah, I went around the kibbutz, which were very fresh still. Places like Nir Oz. I think, by the way, the term kibbutz, maybe we shouldn't use. I think we should just say villages, communities. I think a lot of people in the West don't understand what this is. You know, there's a sort of, it must be something strange. No, it's like a group of genocidal maniacs coming into your town. And yes, I've been in Gaza a fair amount. One of the reasons I went as soon as I could was because I had an early intuition that this denial was going to start. I thought it would. It always does in this scenario. I thought it was going to happen, and it has. And you know, there's two reasons why people do that. One is that they actually love what happened on the 7th, but they don't want to admit it. They're very, very happy about it. And we have these people. Some of them are on social media, some of them are on the streets. They actually celebrate the massacre of Jews. But there's another group, I think a larger number of people, who are aware that what happened is so appalling that if they were to confront it, they would have a problem. You know, if there was a cause that I espoused, a group that I backed, who did that, I'd have the same thing. I'd have two choices. Either I'd confront it or I'd try to get around it. If you're a decent and honest person, you try to confront it. You have to confront it. You have to face it. Even if you're on the side of the Palestinians or you're on the side of the citizens of Gaza, you'd have to confront the fact of what they did. Or you can try to get around the problem. So I knew that this was going to happen, and I knew that it was one of my duties as a journalist and writer to see it with my own eyes. But I'm amazed by some of the things I hear from the West. There's a close enemy of mine in the UK who saw a part of the 47-minute footage and did it like a film review in his column. So I said, well, we don't actually see any women being raped in the video. You're like, wow, what a pit of malevolence you have to be in. We'll give you some other videos and you can get your popcorn out. What sick people there are around. But one of the things that has stunned me, I have to say, among young populations in the West is a very, very straightforward one, which is the Nova Party. If that party had been going on in Britain or America or Canada, or the young people here, you would have been at it, or your friends would have been at it. And you would have thought that in the international community, all those people who like to enjoy themselves, like to go to a party, would have some sympathy with the hundreds of young people who dreamt, not just of dancing, but dreamt of the day they could dance with their Palestinian neighbors, and who saw hell. And I've been to several of the reunions of the survivors, and I mean, they are, even the most coping ones of them are wildly changed in a way that no amount of therapy can probably ever cure. And, you know, again, I'm just stunned by this very simple thing that always stuns me about the international reaction to Israel, is where is your empathy? Where is your damn empathy? I mean, I don't want to go into too many of the details, but one pretty hard day was the cars from the festival, which had blocked the road, you know, and where many people were killed and many were burned alive, were all collected in a site just down the road. And I was allowed access to it with my cameraman. And there were some remarkable young 19-year-old first-year IDF women helping out. But the task was being led by the amazing Orthodox Jews who do the collection of bodies. And they were cleaning the cars with a special device to make sure all the body parts were out, and the blood and everything else. And there were just huge sacks of ash. And that was what had happened to these hundreds of young people. Now, how, on God's name, can any young person think that any of those people did anything wrong, or that anything could have justified that? What do you have to have become? And all I can say is, you have to have become somebody you should not ever want to be.
Why does the international community call for a ceasefire in Israel, even when Hamas refuses to cease its rocket attacks and fighting in Gaza? Is urging a ceasefire essentially just asking Israel to refrain from defending itself and allowing Hamas to continue its actions unchecked?
Yeah, I mean, there's a very easy way for a ceasefire. There's a very easy way to cease hostilities, which is hand back the hostages. You know, and I mean, the sickness of Sinwar and others, you know, the sickness of Sinwar, among other things, he doesn't need any more to be said about him, but, you know, to surround yourself with prize hostages, you know. Again, I'd urge people to wonder whether they're on the right side if they're supporting a man who's so corrupt and so evil that he's stolen billions of dollars from his people and is holding Jewish children around him as a shield. But yes, the war could end very swiftly if they handed back the hostages. The latest, again, it comes back to what I said earlier about the ceasefire. It's always with Israel, always a ceasefire. And that's because of this weird media obsession and the governmental obsession that follows it. They say, I knew this would happen. I knew it would happen. I said to a friend on the 7th, they'll probably give us about 24 hours before the story is Israeli response to blah, 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 blah. I mean, usually when a war involving Gaza and Israel comes up, you hear about the war only because of the Israeli retaliation. The media doesn't tell you what happened that Israel is retaliating to. And that's perfectly normal. And in this conflict, it's been on amphetamines. I mean, they were talking about Israeli retaliation before the IDF had done anything. They were claiming there was a genocide in Gaza before the IDF were even in Gaza. They always do it, and the result of this is the appalling situation which Israel alone among the world's democracies finds itself in, which, and I said this before, but I'll say it again, it's the only country in the world that's never allowed to win a war. I personally think it is intolerable to be in a situation where every couple of years Israel is forced into another Gaza war, and every 15 to 20 years it's forced into another Lebanon war. No country should expect that or have to put up with it. That's why I say that the question with this is this the umpteenth Gaza war, or is it the last? Will the war that I think is coming in the north be the third Lebanon war or the last? And again, sorry, just quickly, because we mentioned the international community. It seems, since the international community pretends that Israel has to abide by everything the international community says, very interesting what they choose not to abide by. Resolution 1701, that was meant to stop the amassing of Hezbollah munitions in the southern part of Lebanon, has been completely disobeyed by Hezbollah since 2006. Well, where is the international community on this? Are international resolutions binding or not? Are they in the case of this one or not? And I would say clearly not. The international community did not stop Hezbollah amassing something like 160,000 very high-level rockets in southern Lebanon. And so again, but it's always the asymmetry of Israel, the obsession with Israel fighting back. And I think that goes, by the way, very deep. There is a shallow version of it, which is just, politically active nincompoops. But there's a deep one as well, which is a very deep level of people who, I'll do it this way. Why do they say genocide? Why do they say genocide? Why do they say that Gaza is a concentration camp? Why do they say Gaza is the Warsaw Ghetto? Why do they say that Israel behaves like Hitler? Because either they want to wound and hurt Jews as deeply as possible and know what they're doing. Or, and this is more of a psychological explanation, and again this exists particularly in Europe, they want at some point to expiate their own guilt by saying that the Israelis behaved as badly. You see, if Israel behaves in a Nazi-like fashion, then everyone else can move on. And I think that one goes very deep. There's a great passage in a favorite novel of mine by Vasily Grossman, the great Russian journalist and author, who, in his magnificent Life and Fate, where Grossman describes his own eyewitness accounts of Stalingrad, everything from Stalingrad to Treblinka. He traversed the midnight of the 20th century. But slap bang in the middle of Life and Fate are 3 pages about the nature of anti-Semitism. And in my view, these pages should be much better known than they are. He says almost everything you need to say. He says, anti-Semitism is something that you can find in the Academy of Sciences and in the games that children play in the schoolyard. But he says everywhere it tells you not about the Jews, but about the person making the accusation. He says, tell me what you accuse the Jews of, I'll tell you what you're guilty of.
You just had a one-on-one with Netanyahu recently. When the cameras are off, yeah, I'm sure you had at least a few minutes to speak to him. Did he shed any light as to what he truly believes is next for the Palestinian people when Hamas is destroyed and wiped off the face of the earth?
Well, yeah, I've met him quite a few times over the years, and probably going back about 20 years. I can tell you quite a funny story about him, if I may. Some years ago, I wrote a book called The Strange Death of Europe about immigration and the challenges to Western societies, the challenges from mass illegal migration. And I saw Netanyahu a little while after the book came out, and he said, are you writing another book? And I said, yes. And he said, you should know something about your last one. He said, there was a mistake in it. And it was about me. I thought, oh, hell. And then I was trying to think. I think I only mentioned him a couple of times in the book, and I remembered. I relayed in the book a conversation that Netanyahu had with Angela Merkel in 2015 when the migration wave was coming into Germany. And I got the call readout from enough people that I could trust it and put it into the book, which was that Angela Merkel said to Netanyahu, you, Israel, are the only country in the world that has ever had to absorb people by proportion of population at such a rate. How did you do it? And I was told that, Netanyahu had explained the absorption centers, the language, blah, 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 blah. And then I treated myself, I said, Prime Minister Netanyahu was probably too diplomatic to mention to Angela Merkel that he had an advantage, and that in the years to come, she and Germany would discover that most of the arrivals were not Lutherans. And anyhow, so I realized that was what Bibi was talking about, and he said, the thing you said I didn't say to Angela, I did. So, anyhow, he's published a plan now about what happens the day after. We covered a bit of it on camera. I think everybody realizes that it's not easy and it requires a regional solution, but the regional partners are very hard to find. If you had a sort of Kissinger-like figure on the international stage, you might have somebody who could pull in, the Israelis to do the securities and say the air cover, the Emiratis to do the education, the Saudis to pay the bills. I don't know. You could, but as I mentioned earlier, the Palestinians have been given to Israel as a problem. And one of the cruelties, I think, of that is that if you don't have an answer to the question of the Palestinians and their potential statehood on otherwise, it's very cruel to say to somebody, here's an insoluble problem that we can't solve, and it's your job to solve it. And that is what has been happening. And so unless there's regional buy-in, I imagine that Israel will have to do a lot of this on its own, but it doesn't want to. I mean, one of the saddest conversations I've had in recent months was in the middle of the Gaza a few months ago, and I was just up from Shifa, and right in the middle of the strip, and I was speaking to a colonel in the IDF, and being British, I thought I'd be polite and pass the time of day, so I said something like, "Do you come here often?" I mean, the other option for small talk in Britain is to say, "Have you come far?" Or, "What do you do?" Anyhow, I said to him, "Do you come here often?" And he said, "I was last here in 2005, pulling family friends from their homes. And here I am, 18 years later, back. Again, I just expect a certain degree of decency and understanding in the international community about the challenge that Israel faces with the Gaza, and why we have ended up in this situation where a patch of land that used to be run by Egypt — I have an Egyptian friend who was born in Gaza as an Egyptian — why Israel is the one country in the world that's meant to solve this insoluble problem. Especially when, in my view, the Palestinians were given a state in 2005. And I do think at some point it's just like, how many states do you want? And it's a serious question. Like, somebody said to me the other day in Israel, said to me, well, what would your plan be? What would you do? And it was slightly facetious, but not that facetious. I said, I would give the Palestinians one small thing to do, like run a kindergarten, and see if you can avoid the temptation to teach the toddlers to kill Jews. Just see. Or maybe a hospital, a little or a nursing center, and see if you can resist the urge to fill it with grenades. Just see. When the Shifa, it's not the Shifa hospital, the Shifa was entered by the IDF the other month, you probably noticed that there were quite a lot of Kalashnikovs, RPGs, grenades, and so on found. And Jeremy Bowen of the BBC was interviewed on air, and the interviewer said, this seems to have been a command center, doesn't it? Because, all of this weaponry. And Jeremy Bowen said, well, it's not impossible that the guns belong to the security department at the hospital. And I wrote back and I said, sure, and maybe the grenades belong to the cardiology department. But it's a serious challenge. Like, literally, if you want a state and you've just been given one and you've made it a terror enterprise, and if 75 to 80% of the Palestinians in the West Bank, if there's an election tomorrow, would vote Hamas, I would not give them a state before I saw if they could do some basic things like education, for goodness sake. We've known this for years about the Palestinian textbooks. The international community, like UNWRA, has not just done nothing, it has exacerbated the problem of the teaching of hate. Anyhow, sorry, that was a long answer.
Is Iran... That's right. Thank you. Is the Islamic regime and Israel, they're going to get into a war eventually. It's going to come down. It's going to happen. How do you believe Israel can navigate such a war when they have so many people that are still living in that country that are actually allies of Israel. How do you conduct a war to destroy this terrorist regime without mass casualties?
Well, first of all, there are lots of corners in the road that we took the wrong turning on. I believe that President Obama's failure to support the 2009 Green Revolution was a historic mistake, I mean, it goes without saying, and we have some Iranian friends here, that what happened in 1979 should be a great reminder to everyone that things don't necessarily go in one direction. You know, this idea that the arc of history bends always towards justice and that everything will just get better and better all the time is a fantasy of children. The reality is that if bad people get their way, everything can be turned backwards. Everything. And I'm always stunned by the inability of people in the West and people in America, Canada, Britain, and elsewhere to understand this basic fact. That you can have a country that is going in a fine direction, or a good enough direction, or you can have reforms and we can work on it. But we know repeatedly from revolutions in history what happens. It's the foundation of conservative thought in Edmund Burke's reflections on the revolution in France. The central realization that the revolution will be followed by the terror. Something that's happened in almost every country, by the way, other than the United States, which is one of the things that makes the United States such a miracle, because it had remarkable people like Thomas Jefferson instead of homicidal maniacs like Robespierre. But that makes all the difference. At the moment, as somebody put it to me the other day when I was on the northern border on Mount Meron, I mentioned to somebody earlier, I spent a day with the Alpine unit of the IDF, which was quite funny because I said to them that they are remarkable people, these men and women. And I said to them, I said to them, you know, the discovery that the IDF has an Alpine division is like discovering that the Eskimo have a desert battalion. But these remarkable people are right up there, and Hezbollah and indeed Hamas, they're busy up there. The night before I was there, 4 Hamas terrorists came across the border and there was a firefight and 18 Israelis were wounded. All 4 of the Hamas people were killed. And I said to one of the people in the fight, I said, how did you know they were Hamas and not Hezbollah? He said, this was a suicide mission. It's not quite what Hezbollah does. But, you know, there's constant artillery, constant rocket fire, and so on. And somebody said to me a little while ago, you know, Israel and Hezbollah are like 2 people on a what are they called, the bicycle, which 2 people, tandem, thank you. Like 2 people on a tandem going downhill. Like one of them will stop pedaling at some point, but they're going to crash. To my mind, it would not be a victory for Israel or for the free world if the end of this conflict saw Hezbollah still operational in Lebanon. I mean, Netanyahu said to me that on camera that, you know, we'd rather not fight a war on 2 fronts, but if we have to, we will. And the question about what Hezbollah is for there is a very interesting question. And the reason they didn't set off on the 7th is also a very interesting question. And we know some of the answers. But in my view, the Hezbollah arsenal is there in case Israel ever takes preemptive action with or without America to take out Iran's nuclear program. It's a mousetrap. Otherwise, I think they would have started earlier. But yes, I mean, it'll have to happen at some point. But it's a terrifying prospect, because these are serious missiles, and the international community has allowed them to be built up, and they're pointed at Tel Aviv and Haifa and Ben Gurion and everywhere else. And I mean, I've been, not to give away too much about my personal circumstances, I've been living in recent months with the residents of Kiryat Shimona, who are displaced. And by the way, that's one of the stories of this conflict which you just do not hear about. I mean, everyone talks about the Palestinian refugees in Gaza. What about the Israeli refugees within Israel? I mean, these are tens of thousands of Israeli families who cannot return to their homes. And anyhow, it's actually a great honor to be with them. They're remarkable people, but yeah, they can't go home. And it's not much, you know, maybe it's fun to live with your family in a hotel room for a week, but for months on end with no end in sight, that's not. And the kids missing out on their education. You know, again, I'd just love to see some international care about that. But no, the Israeli government's looking after its people, and the rest of the world seems to turn away. But, you know, places like Kiryat Shimona, I was up there again the other day, and I mean, it's so close to the Lebanon border, and that's a big town, a big city. It's so close to the Lebanon border that if a rocket lands, it'll literally go bang, 1, 2, siren goes. You can't live in that circumstance, and you can't bring up a family in that circumstance, and no one will move back. So it has, I mean, everyone in Israel knows that has to be addressed. And as I say, that's one of the bizarre things outside of Israel, which is just the total lack of understanding about the reality on the ground. You know, if I can say so, I mean, one of the thoughts I've had in recent months is that I'm very concerned about the disconnect between where Israelis are as a public and where the rest of the world is about this issue, because the rest of the world is still saying the same stuff it always says. You know, ceasefire. Blinken said within days of October the 7th, this is why we need to double down on the two-state solution. Why? Why? What are you doing? This song is dead, in my view. Totally dead. Certainly for the foreseeable future. And why? If the same number of Americans had been killed proportionally as were killed in Israel, then that would have been about 120,000 Americans dead in one day. And thousands kidnapped. Don't tell me that the Americans wouldn't have torn up the earth after such an event. But you know, Blinken goes and he says this is why we have to double down on the two-state solution, and Lord Cameron, as I now have to call him, acts as the sort of forward force for that diplomatically, and your government and others help. And they have no understanding of the reality on the ground. And one of the realities is that there is almost nobody of left, center, right, secular, orthodox, ultra-orthodox, Habadnik, almost nobody in Israel believes you can live beside Hamas. And nobody believes you can live beside Hezbollah. And that's because the people who did believe that most were slaughtered. If you go around the kibbutz in the south, you know, these are people who literally, again, dreamt of peace with their neighbors. You know, there were famous stories that poor 75-year-old woman who drove Palestinian children in Gaza to hospitals. It didn't matter, they burned her alive. You know, the people who You can literally see on what remains of people's fridges and things in places like Beirut, the sort of peace now stickers. If that dream was valid, those people would still be alive and people would still be dreaming that dream. But it was killed. It was killed by Hamas. And I would just say that internationally, people have to realize that it is so deeply unfair to the Israeli people to say, these people who some of you were literally helping day in, day out. I mean, imagine this one. I was in Ofakim the other day, which is it's just some way from the Gaza border. It's where this remarkable woman, Raquel, fed the terrorists in her house and talked to them in Arabic and kept them alive until she went out, and then everyone got shot. Anyhow, I was walking around with a great hero of the 7th called Almog Cohen, and he is a member of the Knesset in Ben-Gvir's party. And again, outside of Israel, people would be surprised at some of the views that people like that have, and that they're not the deep monster bogeymen that they're portrayed forever in the international press. But on the morning of the 7th, Almog Cohen woke up and he heard the rockets, of course, and then the firing, and then he realized that the terrorists had got in, and he was in a very big battle for hours. And he showed me, I've got a photo of it, the map that they got off the body of one of the terrorists. And the map had every single bit of the plan in detail of the town, door by door. They had his house on the map because they wanted to get a member of the Knesset. That was a big prize for Hamas that day. And they missed him. He got them. But his house was on the map. The synagogues were on the map because Hamas knew it was a holy day. And the kindergartens were on the map. Now, how did they get that information? By the people they had brought in to help them and to work with them in the dream that they could live beside these people and integrate more and more. Nobody can tell people in a place like Ofakim that they should try that again. Nobody.
I don't know about you, but I can sit here all night. You are inspiring beyond words. You know. Thank you. These are the questions I have left. I got one, okay? And this isn't even my question. This is my friend, Toby. And I thought it was a good one. What question have you never been asked that you have always wanted to be asked? And answer the question.
I'd like to be very Jewish and answer that with a question. I'll throw it right back at you. I'll throw it right back at you. I genuinely can't think. I feel like I've been asked everything. Elon Levy, my friend who's a very fine spokesperson in Israel, probably saw another Brit born, but he was the one who was asked by that Sky interviewer, what was the question? Oh yeah, if because the Israelis are exchanging one Israeli for 4 Palestinians, does that mean you think that Palestinians are like 4? And I remember he was like, I said to him when I watched it, I said, you were much faster than me. I was still thinking like, what is happening to the world? Did she say that really? How can anyone be this dumb? should I just leave? You know. And the truth is, you get every question all the time. I mean, it's just crazy. The misunderstandings are the biggest ones. One of my favorites. I mean, people just don't know anything. That's what I do have one. I mean, Jews, in my view, tend to think that everything can be answered by like a particularly brilliant argument. You know, it's like, yeah, I've got it. So in 1863, no, whatever. And I always say, don't think people are that smart. Most people don't know anything. Like most people, for years, I used to do this trick when people said, you know, the terrible Warsaw Ghetto in Gaza, and they're all hemmed in. I said, that's why you have to join me in demanding the Egyptians tear down that wall. And, I mean, 99% of the time, the person goes, what? I was telling somebody earlier that I was once in Cairo just before the overthrow of Mubarak, and I was speaking with some very smart young Egyptians, and was friends with them, and we were going out clubbing and things, and seeing the better side of Cairo. And one day, I said, "Look, what's all this 8th of October stuff going on? You know, there was like an 8th of October road and 8th of October city, and I said, like, but what's all the 8th of October stuff?" And he said, well, obviously it's commemorating our victory over the Israelis. And I said, which victory? 1973. I said, I'm sorry to break this to you, old chap, but you lost that one. And the one before. And he said, what? I said, yeah. He said, I thought we whipped their ass. I said, I'm afraid that the Jews whipped your ass. And he said, oh, really? I'm amazed. My point is that, I mean, that's in a country that's relatively free for the region, but go to any, just take this advice. Go to anyone, ask anyone who gives you an ill-informed opinion about Israel to point to it on a map. Seriously. Easy as that. Or ask them which countries are in the neighborhood, which ones they border. Just ask them. And I guarantee you that 95% of the time, your conversationalist will say Venezuela, or they don't expect people know anything. It's sadly not the case. But if that's the last question, can I say something?
We're going to do maybe a couple of Q&As.
Oh yeah, do that.
Think?
Yeah.
Are you guys okay with that? I got a bunch of emails. We'll just do a few because it's getting late and I haven't slept in weeks. Okay. What could be a viable solution for a livable peace with the Palestinians? With the hope of war ending and Hamas's eradication, do you know if there are other Muslims with a similar mindset as Mossab Hassan Youssef, the Green Prince? And do you think there's any possibility that Palestinian civilians would want them to work in a leadership position with Israelis? Similar to what I asked, I guess.
I'll answer this because this is a bit grim, and then I'll say something hopefully not grim. Mossab is a friend of mine, known as the Green Prince, some of you all know, and I was with him again recently in Israel. He's a very unusual person. Having said that, I've known a couple of people like him in my life who've been born into extremist organizations and have thought their way out. That is highly unusual. It's highly unusual, let alone, as Mossab did, like risk your life and end up giving up all of your family connections and your entire support network and like starting afresh elsewhere. That is highly unusual and one of the many reasons I admire him so much. But I would just say again that, I mean, there's no hope for the Palestinians until they create a culture of hope themselves, and a culture which encourages learning and non-hatred. And until that day, they will be hopeless. And if they cannot educate their young to not hate, then their situation will be hopeless. Because, you know, here's some news for them. Israel ain't going anywhere. And
One more? Okay.
No, I just wanted to say one thing. So guys, the hour is late, and people have a snow to drive through. Let me say a couple of things just very quickly. Firstly, thank you. Thank you to all. And thank you to all of the remarkable men and women who've made this evening possible. I also want to say thank you to all of you. I think there are quite a lot of things you can do in Toronto on a Wednesday night, including staying at home. But you didn't, and you chose to come out and to join us. And we don't take that for granted at all, and we're deeply, deeply grateful that you've shared this evening with us. So thank you. And one other thing, if I may. I just wanted to say something that hasn't come up, and maybe finish on this. A lot of people at the moment in Jewish communities around the world are feeling very beleaguered and very alone and very afraid. And I understand this very much, and am deeply pained by it, like a lot of people. But I wanted to say one thing in particular, which is this. Funnily enough, if you want to feel some hope, come to Israel. And I'll tell you why. It's not just that it's a country currently united in a common purpose and in a common cause, that has woken up to a reality that countries like this and Britain and America have not yet woken up to. And, you know, sleep well if you can. But it's not just those things. It's one thing in particular. Everybody who fought in the wars of 1967, 1973, and First Lebanon War, Second, everyone in Israel of a certain age used to have a lingering feeling over recent years, which is, what are the young generation like? After Russia invaded Ukraine, there was a poll of Americans, and it found that about 52% of Americans said that they would stay and fight if their country was invaded like Ukraine had been invaded. A majority of Republicans, a minority of Democrats, who presumably would hot-foot it to Canada, assuming it wasn't you doing the invading, which I'd like to take as read. In Britain the other day, there was a poll because the foreign secretary said, if Russia rolls into NATO countries, our army isn't big enough, we're going to need conscription. And a minority of people said that they would stay and fight. And I just wanted to say this. Don't trust those polls. People rise to the occasion if they have it in them. And you can nurture it in people. There is no reason why young people in Canada or America or Britain or the rest of the West should be weak and intimidated and pushed around and made to feel bad because of nothing they've done. There is no reason that we should be nurturing generations of cringing people. I think of a country like this one as having produced remarkable people and tough people and strong people, quiet in their strength, but strong. And Israel has shown something remarkable which the rest of the world should learn from. As one man said to me the other week in Israel, he said, I fought in 1967 and 1973, and you know, I owe the young generation an apology. They have been magnificent. And if you want hope, come to Israel, see the young men and women. They're not remarkable before you realize that they've become remarkable. They didn't know they were remarkable. They picked up guns and drove south as fast as they could, and they went back to their units at massive oversubscription rates. They flew from around the world the day after to get back home and join their units. They, every day, every hour of every day, they are keeping the people of Israel safe. They have been weighed in the balance and found to be magnificent. So I say, when people say, oh, well, what should Israel learn about the rest of the world? The rest of the world should be so lucky as to learn from Israel. And the rest of the world should be so lucky as to produce a generation like this. So if you want hope, come over and I'll see you there.
There's one last thing we'd like to do. We'd like to offer you this beautiful award.
Sure.
It's our first. He's coming up. This is Brian Lipovetsky, co-founder of Tafsik.
Thank you. Oh, right.
So my name is Brian Lipovetsky, and I wanted to thank you, first of all. Thank you for coming and being here with us. Thank you to everyone who joined us tonight. And I'm going to say a few words. So if you just yes, please sit down. So we wanted to give you something. This is our first award, first Tafsik's award, and we plan on doing more. So those of you who joined us tonight, would you like Tafsik to do another event like this? Yes? Absolutely. Imagine a world where understanding our past empowers us to shape a future free from the chains of hatred and division. A world where one's individual relentless pursuit of truth and justice lights the way for others. Today we gather not just to celebrate such a vision, but to honor a man who embodies this ideal. Douglas Murray is not just a scholar, but he is a beacon of truth in a time clouded by misinformation. Through his rigorous analysis of historical events, he has shed light on complex geopolitical dynamics, always with the aim of fostering a more informed and compassionate world. The Cyrus Ally Award, named after Cyrus the Great, symbolizes more than just the recognition. It embodies the bridge between ancient allyship and our contemporary struggle against anti-Semitism. Douglas Murray stands as a modern-day Cyrus, championing the values of understanding, justice, and unity. As we honor Douglas Murray here today, our journey does not end here. Inspired by his dedication, let us each commit to being allies in our own daily lives. Standing firmly against hatred and the principles of democracy and freedom, together we can build a future that honors the legacy of Cyrus the Great and the courageous spirit of Douglas Murray.
Oh, thank you. What a pleasure. There you go. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. A safe drive home.